Thank you very much, Dr. Jonas. The next opening remarks will be by His Excellency Horiichi Toshihiko, Ambassador of Japan to the African Union. Your Excellency.
Right. Dr. Jonas Adeadeto, Director, Institute for Peace and Security Studies, Addis Ababa University, Excellencies, distinguished panelists. As a co-organizer of this Pre-Tana Regional Multi-Stakeholder Dialogue, I'm pleased to be with you today. IPSS has been convening prominent annual Tana high-level forums on security in Africa with African top leaders. This distinguished research and education institution has been leading the dialogue on peace and security in the continent. We acknowledge that this year marks the 10th anniversary of such.
Nous commémorons donc le 10e anniversaire.
And Dr. Jonas for their long-time dedication. Prior to this historic forum, we are going to discuss today the emerging technologies and their impact on peace and security in Africa. New technology is a double-edged sword. Innovation and new invention have been a great deal of a contributor to the well-being of humankind. However, they could be a destructive factor in our security once mishandled. Technology advances so quickly. Human ethics and legal regulatory framework are also steadily progressing, but they do not catch up the pace of technological advancement. In such circumstances, the theme today is associated with our actual assignments that we must accomplish. Japan, as a leading advocate of human security, has been collaborating with the African Union and REX to assist Africa's peace building, conflict prevention, and mediation efforts through NAPSA, New Approach for Peace and Stability in Africa, initiated by the 7th Tokyo International Conference on African Development, or TICAD 7, in 2019. Next year, Japan will co-organize TICAD 8 in Tunisia. We have been discussing various aspects, including development and business, a society with COVID or post-COVID, as well as peace and security, which is also the prerequisite for all human activities. We would like to continue our dialogue with various stakeholders, including through this Pre-Tana forum. I conclude my remarks by looking forward to ideas and insights expressed by the distinguished speakers and panelists today. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your opening remarks. Now we move on to the first session, which is on the state of play of emerging technologies in peace and security in Africa. I would like to call upon Dr. Havile Matlosa, former Director of Political Affairs of African Union and Program Advisor at UNDP currently, to the floor. Dr. Havile, thank you very much for joining us. You have the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruby, for the opportunity. Let me thank Dr. Jonas. Let me thank Madam Letty and all the IPSS staff and the ambassador from Japan. It's my pleasure to join this seminar and to moderate this first session. We have our first session, and as it has been indicated, the topic for the first session is a state of play of emerging technologies in peace and security in Africa. And we have a team of 3 substantive presenters and a discussant. I'll introduce them briefly in a short while. We aim to focus in this first session on 4 main issues. The first will be the expansion of the concept of emerging technologies and unpacking this concept, the concept of emerging technologies in Africa. The second idea would be to deal with the issue of advancement of technologies and their application in peace and security in Africa. So after dealing with the concept itself of emerging technologies, unpacking them, then we're going to deal with the interface between these technologies and the state of peace and security on our continent. The third idea is to identify opportunities and challenges caused by the advancement of technology in peace and security governance on the continent. And the final, last but not least, will be to interrogate the impact of these emerging technologies on multilateralism globally, in particular as it affects Africa within the framework of Agenda 2063, as well as the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. I think that is the whole idea, and factoring peace and security in that context. And I'm happy to introduce a high-level panel that we have for this session. And I have 3 substantive presenters. And let me introduce them now together with the discussant so that they can now come immediately and then present. I have first and foremost Madame Olufomilayo Fumi Arewa, who is the Schusterman Professor of Business and Transactional Law in Temple University, Temple University Best School of Law. So she's a law professor. The second speaker will be Mr. Kataoka Sataharu, who is again a professor of international liberal studies at Waseda University in Japan. And we'll have the third speaker, who is Madame Chioma Akuyobo, Executive Director of Tech Heng, based in Abuja, Nigeria. Those are substantive presenters. And then we'll wrap it up with a discussant discussing all the issues that Mr. Joseph Amakwa Amwa, who is at the Kent University in the United Kingdom. Now, this is our lineup, and I'll be guided by the moderator. I was given the impression that the presenters will deliver within a space of 10 minutes. I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. Are they delivering within the 10 minutes or 10 minutes per discussion, per presenter? Can I get guidance there, Rubia?
Yes, 10 minutes is better.
10 minutes per presenter.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I wanted to be clear on that because I wasn't quite sure. So there we go. I want to confirm that all my presenters are here. Fumi. Professor Fumi?
Here. Yes, I'm here.
Yes, my sister. You'll be the one to kick it off. And then I have Professor Sadaharu. Anyway, let's just kick it off. Sorry, we don't lose a lot of time. Prof. Fumi, please, you go ahead. You have 10 minutes, please. I'll switch off my video, And by the time you see my video on, you should know that you are about to end. So I don't have to interrupt you. Just look at me. If you see me, you know there's trouble.
Thank you very much. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. It's a pleasure to be here today. I wanted to thank the organizers and staff for their organization of this important session. I wanted to start out by saying my remarks today are based on my recent book, Disrupting Africa, Technology, Law, and Development, which was published in July of this year by Cambridge University Press. And my book and my remarks today reflect my background as a lawyer, law professor, and anthropologist. As an anthropologist, my focus of studies, one of my key focus of studies was African studies. As a practicing lawyer and law professor, I've worked extensively with and inside the startup company ecosystem in Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston, and with global issues related to technology policy. Now, the book that my remarks are based on is based on archival research, which seeks to identify the continuing implications of lawmaking processes and legal institutions initially put in place during colonialism for management of digital era challenges. And the focus of my research is really business and commercial law frameworks, principally, although not exclusively, in British colonies. And the primary focus of my research is Nigeria. And I focus in my research on patterns of borrowing in legal and policy arenas of both external laws and external models. And what I discuss extensively in my book is the need for greater consideration of local people and needs as people think about the adoption and adopt legal and policy frameworks. So my remarks today will focus on two things. I want to first of all talk about the implications of emerging technology landscape from a sociocultural perspective, with a bit of discussion of some of the legal implications. And I also want to talk about key priorities for the future. So as we all know, throughout Africa, we've seen a digital technology revolution in recent years. And there's a long list of emerging technologies and new uses of existing technologies that's long and varied. So in addition to mobile phones, this list might include social media, messaging, video and messaging and video platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, and TikTok, internet and e-commerce applications, Internet of Things devices, drones and robots, technologies that facilitate automation, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, biometrics, biotechnology and genetic engineering, agrotechnology, and last but not least, peer-to-peer technologies, including file sharing, blockchain, and cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin. So that's a very long list. So obviously I'm not going to address every piece of technology mentioned on my list. What I would like to highlight is these emerging technologies highlight a collision of past paths and future digital economy possibilities. And they also reveal something of the nexus between the internal and external that's particularly evident in the legal and regulatory arena. Throughout the world, we face a question today of how do we regulate these new technologies that have become pervasive? And this is a global question that I think is a continuing discussion about how do we regulate these technologies. In addition to that global question, in many African countries, we also have questions related to colonial era overhang, particularly in the legal and regulatory arena. I'm not going to talk further about that point, but it's an important context to take account of. What we also know is that future paths of economic prosperity and social stability require engagement with and incorporation of these technologies in formal and informal context, which will likely require robust legal, regulatory, and governance reforms. And this is certainly true throughout the world and is true in Africa as well, throughout Africa as well. Now, the broad range of technologies, including automation, robots, and AI, are also having an impact on future development paths. As a 2019 report by the Tony Blair Institute of Global Change notes, automation may limit the ability of African countries and developing countries more generally to follow earlier development paths of countries such as China. This technology revolution has the potential to enable greater participation, but also at the same time, greater conflict and instability. It may enable new social and economic possibilities, but it also enables things like fake news and various forms of manipulation, exploitation, and uses of private and personal information. It may enable forms of protest, some of which may be part of a reform process and dialogue, but it may also do things like facilitate insurgencies. as a 2018 report by RAND notes, spread of social media in Africa has brought many economic and political benefits, while also equipping terrorist groups with a tool for recruitment and propaganda, which obviously has significant implications for peace and security. Also, I want to just highlight, before I talk about some key challenges to think about, digital era technologies in African contexts unfold in an era of significant population growth, which is likely to continue to create internal pressures and the need for sustained economic growth in light of increasing population growth. And just a few data points from this, the population boom, by some projections, may lead to Nigeria's replacing the United States as the third most populous country in the world after China and India by 2050. And part of what we're seeing is significant growth in youth populations who are often more deeply engaged with technology, but who also may experience high unemployment and underemployment and what I refer to as a scarcity of opportunity. The combination of the emerging technologies and demographic changes creates pressures and may lead to heightened protest, conflict, and instability. So the key question I want to raise, that's a core part of my research, is how do we create successful development strategies with changing demographics in context of widely disseminated emerging technologies that are likely to be critical for future economic growth, but which are also a source of significant disruption and potentially continued instability, insecurity, and conflict. So I want to end by talking about 3 priorities for the future. The first priority I want to talk about is there's a need for sustained digital economy strategic management of both internal and external circumstances. And I see this as combating what I refer to as double marginalization. Many African countries today are marginalized globally in many respects from an economic perspective. At the same time, many within countries in Africa are marginalized and poor. So Nigeria, for instance, as I mentioned before, has high levels of both poverty and population growth. World Bank statistics suggest that in June 2018, 7 of the 10 countries with the highest absolute poverty, number of people in extreme poverty, were in Africa. And in fact, Nigeria has become the country in the world with the most number of people in absolute poverty, surpassing India. Without fundamental policy reform, poverty levels in Nigeria and other countries in Africa will increase potentially significantly. By 2030, the World Bank forecasts that 9 in 10 extremely poor people in the world will live in sub-Saharan Africa. So technology disruption in emerging technologies mandates changes to past approaches to governance and economic and social management with an eye to embracing the challenges of the digital era. And I think from a strategic management perspective, we have to recognize that narrow paths may be present given external and internal circumstances. My book suggests that we need to think about new hybrid models of governance and institutions to manage some of the emerging technologies and that we're seeing in the digital era. So new approaches to governance that acknowledge the critical importance of technology access for economic growth, and that may recognize in some instances potential limits of effective government control in context of widely disseminated technologies, particularly peer-to-peer technologies, including blockchain and Bitcoin. These may pose challenges to existing centralized structures of governance, intermediation, and control. So we need real thought as to how do we actually manage these types of technologies in the digital era. And second priority, in addition to strategic management of internal and external circumstances, we also need to think about improving systems of measurements. There's a narrow window for strategic navigation given internal and external constraints that requires careful collaboration and continuing measurement of outcomes. The Mo Ibrahim Foundation, in its 2019 African Governance Report, notes that African countries face enormous challenges, both in terms of working on the measurability of targets of the development agendas and developing the statistical capacity required to collect data to measure those targets. And this issues with internal collection of data occur in an environment where information has become raw material and digital economy gold, where a lot of people are collecting information, and we need policies and governance structures that recognize the internal and external implications of this. This is coming, but I think further thought about that. And the last thing I would highlight is bridging divides. Technology may give us opportunities for greater conflict, but could be an essential mechanism for bridging divides and instilling greater peace and security. And I would just highlight a number of divides: poverty and inequality, intergenerational divides, gender divides, which I highlight are of critical importance related to technology, where exclusion of women in technology spaces is a global phenomenon, rural and urban divides, other bases of conflict, including based on ethnic, religious, and regional, make in terms of bridging divides. I think, can you hear me okay? Okay, so I would say that we need to have greater focus on conflict resolution and think about mechanisms for internal conflict resolution that need to be prioritized, and also ways to create future paths that bridge the divides I mentioned and that reduce internal and external marginalization. And as part of that, just one final point, we need to think about relationships with external powers, including digital powers, who are not governments and who may be difficult to regulate with existing systems of governance using domestic or international law. So the digital economy, of course, raises continuing questions about jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that rich presentation. I'm not going to even try to summarize. I think you did a good job, and towards the end, I like the 3 points that you made, which we should highlight, and hoping that we'll also be able to get your presentation at some point, and maybe also an indication of how to get that book that you published. That would be very helpful. Now, the 3 points that you make, which are very important. One is that there's need for Africa to think creatively and innovatively around digital economy strategic management to address the continent's global marginalization in this digital era. So I think that you've made that point loud and clear, and you suggest that there's need for deliberate policy reforms in that direction. Second, you then move to the imperative for governance reforms to improve governance systems of measurement of development agenda in terms of collection of data as to the extent to which Africa is meeting its development commitments. This could also include Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. This could also include the UN 2030 agenda. To what extent are we collecting accurate data using these technologies to assess progress in that direction? Finally, you speak passionately about bridging divides and instilling sustainable peace and stability on the continent. And this would require dealing with divides such as poverty, hunger, inequality, gender divide, intergenerational divide, and all those kind of divides, religious, regional, etc., etc. And this goes to the heart of what is meant by positive peace as against negative peace. So I think you made very, very valid 3 points towards the end of your talk. Thank you so much. And we'll move forward. Can we have Professor Kataoka?
Yeah.
Sadaharu?
Yeah.
Prof, please, you have 10 minutes, please.
Okay. Thank you.
You have 10 minutes, Prof.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
10 minutes, huh? Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I share the screen. And, so, in fact, thank you very much for me, Chairman, Mr. Kabere, Dr. Kabere. And let me explain to you. Today, my talk will be divided into 3 parts, but I have just only 10 minutes. So I'll maybe jump up many documents. Sorry. This is the current. First part, that the current situation of the security situation in Africa, and overview of current security situation in Africa, political destabilization, Guinea, Conakry, Chad, and Sahel, and Cabo Delgado in Mozambique. And second part, the maybe main topics related to this conference for IPPS, the emerging high technology in Africa. And how
Technologie
to,
émergente en Afrique et comment
how to apply it to this conflict in Africa. And
comment
Japan's role, the role of Japan, the Japan's call for this conflict matter, the safety card and the NAPSA, and already mentioned by Ambassador Horiji, but I'll make an additional comment about this NAPSA brought by Japanese government. Okay, and rapidly the latest military coup happened in Guinea. In fact, I have known him, Alpha Conde, since 1990s when he was exiled in Paris. The remarkable person, but very unfortunate, the terrible image, the failure of this very impressive career of this person. In the past, he was considered as a Nelson Mandela of West Africa, Madiba of West Africa, because he was in jail in long period. But I think he made a big mistake. He tried to run for the third mandate. I think that in Africa, some pattern of political destabilization. So when the president instead to stay long time, longer than the normal principle, we have always some very difficult and so Guinea oversaw Alpha Conde. Maybe in the result of bad governance done by him and authoritarian tendency and economic mismanagement and violation of democratic norms and so forth. But new strongman, Mamadou Doumbouya, former French legionary, but he said that the duty of soldier is to save the country. But according to the new latest development, Conde, he is refusing to be ousted. But I don't know, maybe that's the end of that's a very tragic history. And after Guinea, the third military coup happened in this Guinea after Conte, after Kamara. The very unfortunate result of this country. Okay. And the second part is Chad. Very bad image of West Africa. Second example is Chad. But for as well as Chad, military solution has never been an efficient one. So no military solution. So that's why, in fact, the main themes of this conference is very timely. That I'm thinking. And Chad, as you know very well, Mr. Itno, who took the power in the 1990s, but he died. He was killed in the battle with rebels, fact. But that injected uncertainty and turmoil into France, United States, and the European partner. But following announcement is this, immediately his son, in fact, second son, because his first son was killed in Paris, Mohamed Idriss Deby, also known as Kaka, he succeeded. Second son. But in fact, the EU has a very ambiguous attitude. EU disqualified Guinea and Mali, not for Chad, because the Constitution Chad, which has been suspended, required that the President of the National Assembly will take charge of in the case of the presidential vacancy or incapacity. But in fact, against this rule, Mohammed was appointed as head of the state. And Deby ruled Chad with an iron grip for 3 decades. But in fact, his problem, he had very good close relationship with France. So maybe let me show you. The David was eternal friend of French president, the Mitterrand, Chirac, Sarko, Hollande, and even Macron. And Macron became the role of the Mitterrand is a Mohammed. So this image explains everything. The relationship between France and the Chad and family, the Italo family. And the third part of my talk for Sahel. But for Sahel, most important thing, the focusing one region or one aspect, the crisis, actually is not working at all. Because many elements are within this Sahel crisis. Chad's withdrawal of troops, the resurgence of Boko Haram, attacks in northern Cameroon, and military coup, repetition, accumulation of military coup in Mali, and Burkina Faso actually is losing the control of all territory. Not all territory. But Mali, in fact, since 2012, has faced volatile crisis. Many negative elements. So let me accelerate. And that opened regionalization of conflict. And political groups, including ethnic-based movements, jihadist groups. That's the most important thing, jihadist groups. And transnational criminal networks fight for hegemony and control trafficking routes in the north. Let me accelerate. And in jihadist violence, actually it's increasing. That's actually a problem. And Mali's instability has regional consequences as violent extremism spreads into neighboring countries, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mauritania, even northern part of Cameroon. So regional governments and the foreign backers like France and the EU with clear policy choice in this year. But when we are talking about this issue, when we are watching the fate of Afghanistan, the very difficult the resolution for this conflict, very difficult the perspective. But conflict Sahel has worsened, and spread to new areas. Whether to redouble the military and policy responses to the insurgency or switch track the political dialogue-led strategy. But both, we have to make both strategy. But that's so easy. Actually, even now, more than 25 different jihadist groups or terrorist groups, but violent groups, panned out across the region, this region. And let me just show you now most important problem. Actually, most important, currently most important problem, Liptak Gurma, in conflict between herders and farmers. And some countries stigmatizing Fulani, poor people, and exaggerated killings. So very difficult situation. That 8 years ago and 9 years ago, last year, but now, military operation, regional security responses, but it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient. And meanwhile, political instability happened in Mali. Twice, military coup in 2020, this year, Keita ousted, and the interim president ousted. Still, incumbent new strongman, Asmi Goita, and principal jihadist movement, Jenim, Yadagari, Tuareg, Marian, ISIS, was Sahrawi. That problem Sahel, the clandestine channel, tapping illegal drugs, tobacco, and sorry, gold. And they are making some deal with smugglers, even the smugglers of Gulf countries. Sorry, it's not accelerate. Yeah, Sahara, the Western Sahara. France several operations. They began several operations in 2013, and they started Balkan, but they announced that Operation Balkan 2014, but they stopped this Balkan operation.
Yes, Prof. If you could just summarize, please.
Okay. But that's technology issue, and Cabo Delgado. I mean, just for the another conflict with Cabo Delgado, but with the high technology equipment of the external forces like Wagner of Russian militia and DIC Advisory Group, DAG, this one, the private military companies, Wagner and DAG, they have high technology equipment, but they failed. That's my point of view. They failed. So now, what is happening? After attacking Palma, Mr. Nyusi initially rejected any external intervention. He preferred Wagner and DAG, but now he accepted SADC intervention, SADC and Rwanda intervention. And lastly, this is my previous panels pointed out the many cases, the high technology matter, 3D printing, 5G, AI, IoT, blockchain, that can change human communication. But of course, technology is very important, can allow new opportunities to manage, transform, and resolve conflicts. Very innovative approaches, very welcome. But that with classical methods also is important. Having said that, this classical method, Japan's NAFTA, in fact, one of classical method, use of technology, use of AI, peace building, conflict resolution, that's okay. But some risks are, let me show you. Well, 2 minutes. Some risks. Malevolent use of high technology, offensive cyber weapons, negative use of AI powers, drones, and disinformation operation, demagogy, espionage. These technologies could be stolen by terrorists, a bombing error. There's many risks. And jihadists are known to be tech savvy. They can use these tools. But recruitment for terrorists, that's one under risk, propaganda. And having said that, Japan has some rule. This is the last one. My last part. Japan law. Of course, timid, very military support with the constitution, very timid military support. But we have a strong diplomatic commitment. For example, 13 years ago, but very unknown history, anecdote, in TICAD 4, we organized in Yokohama, but what we are calling Miracle of Yokohama. We organized, we are observer, the Horn of Africa meeting. At the time, Meres, Isaias, Bashir, they are there. In Africa, they hated each other, but they met in Yokohama and they discussed, I think for the first time in the history of these 3 principal strong men. And TICAD 5, capacity building, the promotion dialogue in Sahel. And with TICAD 7, for the first time, Japan becoming the observer of Sahel meeting, G7, G5 Sahel. And lastly, NAFTA. NAFTA, in fact, Japan's version of African solution to African problem. This is Japanese version of African solution to African problem. Origins, wise men meeting happened took place 2018. Chisano, Sogro, Mpaka, Mbeki, Obasanjo visited Japan to discuss this matter. And after recommendation done by 5 wise men, Japan took new initiative that we call NAPSA. In fact, focusing on institution building. Okay, that's very important. That's the conclusion. I think that, of course, good use of high technology, but efficient combination. But hybrid methods is more important. Hybrid methods, combination of classical methods and these high technology. I end. Thank you very much for listening to my very rapid presentation. I stop now.
Thank you very much, Prof. That was a very rich presentation. Sorry for the time pressure, but the message is loud and clear. And I hope we will also get this presentation through the organizers. I think you made a very good case. You did a panoramic, overview of the instability in Africa, number of conflicts happening, focusing mainly on the Sahel belt and touching on Mozambique, Cabo Delgado, parts of West Africa, what's happening now in Guinea, Chad, Mali, etc., etc. And you end up with 3 important proposals. First, that technology, this emerging technological, advances, they are a double-edged sword. They can advance peace building under favorable conditions. They can also undermine peace. So when we adopt them, we need to go for a hybrid approach of using both traditional as well as the new technologies, but also emphasizing more on their positive effect on peace building. That's number 1. Number 2, which is also part of their adverse effect, is the link between these technologies and terrorism and violent extremism, which also interfaces with criminal networks, cross-border criminal networks, including human trafficking, truck trafficking, etc., etc. And that this needs to be looked at carefully so that the continent is not destabilized through these operations. And finally, and then you look at the Japan's role, that Japan historically has had a very strong diplomatic relations with Africa and African countries, and its diplomatic commitment to the continent remains firm. And this is shown through TICAT and NAPSA that you have highlighted. And Japan emphasizes, a positive, positive utilization of technology for peaceful Africa, with their focus on dialogue and reconciliation where conflicts exist. I think in a nutshell, that's what you have shared with us. I'll call on Madam Choma. Madam Choma from Abuja. Thank you very much, Prof. Madam Choma.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, Madam, we have 10 minutes, yeah? Please.
That's fine. Thank you. Good morning,
Yes.
everyone. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear, madam. Please proceed.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think an excellent thing about speaking after professors is that they've done all the hard bits, defined all the concepts, and I just have to concur with everything they've said, really, and I'll sound intelligent. Unfortunately, it becomes really tough to follow such brilliant presentations, but I'll try. I want to focus or just approach this conversation from the point of people in Africa. And how technologies can be deployed to improve the lives of citizens on the continent and beyond. Like we say at TechCard, the social enterprise at where I work, technology that's not applied is not useful. And so we're talking today about emerging technologies and the state of play as far as it concerns peace and security. And so we think about, technologies like artificial intelligence, robotic press automation, machine learning, quantum computing, etc., etc. However, the word emerging technology also refers to the continuing development of existing technology. I'll take your mind back to gene therapy from the 90s, which is still in development and which I must say we are not yet fully utilizing both on the continent and beyond. Now, emerging technologies are capable of changing the status quo and causing like rapid evolution or rapid evolvement of progress in any place. We look at places like Rwanda, where you have zipline, right? And that has transformed, using drones, the delivery of medicines, the delivery of blood. You look at M-Pesa in Kenya and how that just changed the game as far as payments are concerned. Come to Nigeria and you hear things like PiggyVest, which again, just revolutionized the way young people save money, the way young people invest. And there's also LifeBank by Temigiwa and how they are delivering, life-changing or life-saving blood and medicines. Now, emerging technology coming to security now, they've had like a significant impact on security on the continent. They have forced people to come together a little more. They have, like other speakers mentioned, unfortunately, they have deepened the effect of things like terrorism. They have deepened the effect of things like banditry. They have deepened the effect of fraud. And all of these things have security implications, not just for the individual countries, but also for the continent. The digital revolution's legacy will be determined not just by the technology, but its effect on the application, or its effect and the application as it concerns security, as it concerns securing the lives of people. And I think one thing I'd like us to take away from this discussion is that we must start to see peace and security not just as, the security of geographical locations, but of the people, of the ideals of the people, of the aspirations of the people, of the children, of the women, of the people with disabilities. Now, things like peacekeeping operations, threat monitoring and neutralization can now be performed more efficiently due to technological advancement. Countries and governments can now use new technologies to prevent and manage threats to peace and security via monitoring developments that tend to, escalate and cause chaos, or by monitoring trends that can turn violent. And so they can prevent these actions. You can now put in place preventative measures to forestall these types of actions. What are some challenges to these new emerging technologies? They can present a lot of threats to democratization and to democracies. And I kind of hinted about that when I talked about the fact that governments need to start seeing security and national security as more about the people and not about geographical locations and not even about their politics. Worldwide, there have been harmful threats, there have been destructive threats that have been perpetrated via new technologies. For instance, technologies powered by AI have been used in persecuting activists, they have been used in surveillance, they have been used in monitoring minorities, including the alleged Chinese use of AI to target the Uyghur community. And so they have people can use AI to target specific groups during disinformation campaigns. They have been used to target groups with misinformation during elections or employed in everyday policing. In Africa, there's been an increase in the use of destructive AI technologies. For instance, there's deepfake technologies that have been employed deep learning to create synthetic media, manipulating images, manipulating videos, manipulating even sound, and then superimposing them into source files so that things can be altered in a very subtle manner. And for the people who are not discerning, or to be honest, just for the everyday layperson on the street, these bits of information can be really, really, really destructive. Deep learning has also been used to generate text independently. So many of these texts appear to be humans, but they're not. There's the almost worldwide proliferation of bots, especially on social media, where you think you're actually having a conversation with someone, but these are things that have been pre-programmed to ensure that a specific message is passed. Now, the United Nations University has pointed out that deepfakes or the creation of artificial videos, voice recordings, and data could be used to emphasize existing ethnic and religious divisions and to attack nascent democratic institutions. For instance, in Gabon in 2018, a deepfake video of President Ali Bongo was cited as the trigger for an unsuccessful coup attempt by the Gabonese military. These things have real implications, not just on one person, but on the lives of many. The university also mentioned misinformation through social media networks to manipulate voter and political behavior, favoring interest groups and those with access to this technological knowledge. I think the thing to also mention here is how technologies can be used as a defense or can be used as offense against people without knowledge. So if you even look at, the pandemic that we've all been through, and some of us are still going through that pandemic, as technologies continued to emerge, you will see almost as it were a widening of divide across countries. So countries that are more technologically enabled have the upper hand against countries that are not technologically enabled. We have all these conversations about vaccine access and vaccine passports, but underneath all of that is the capacity for the technology to produce, is the capacity for the technology to store, and it's also the capacity for the technology to distribute the vaccines. So whether we like it or not, technological warfare can be transmitted in so many different ways. As I start to round up, finally, there is more importantly, and I mentioned this earlier, the manipulation of the word national security by governments, especially on the continent. Now, the University of Toronto Citizen Lab report from, I think, 2019, called Running Around in Circles, talked about a number of countries, including Nigeria, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Equatorial Guinea, and a number of others, as countries that have employed circle surveillance platforms to exploit flaws in telecom systems and access phone calls, SMS messages, and location services. And I think an interesting question to ask here is that, why is it so much easier to surveil citizens or to follow citizens about, tracking their imprints, their digital imprints? But when it comes to combating terrorism, somehow our governments always seem to fall short. That's something to think about. Now, increased penetration of technologies have brought us to a point where governments need to renegotiate utility of digital technologies. It is critical, as I close, to note that advocates, so digital advocates, digital rights advocates, human rights defenders must engage proactively. One, to ensure that we are educating our governments. I belong to the Paris Peace Forum Expert Working Group on Digital Technologies and Artificial Intelligence. And one of the things we continue to talk about is how do we educate our governments so that, using Nigeria as an example, we don't approach any unknown with a ban. For instance, in Nigeria, we banned the use of drones, we banned cryptocurrency, we also have recently banned Twitter. We approach things we don't know by canceling them out first. It's also important to mention that El Salvador, a couple months ago, the president of El Salvador was on Twitter talking about, on Twitter Spaces about the country's adoption of Bitcoin or about the country's adoption of cryptocurrency as one of their currencies. And you have to think about the difference between that kind of country and in Nigeria, where Twitter is banned because Twitter has enforced, their community guidelines, unfortunately, against, the president of the country. So what are some of my recommendations? The first of them is that African leaders and AU member states must be proactive in learning so that they can prevent the misuse of technologies, of these new technologies by terrorists, by people who just want to be unfortunate, and deploy these technologies primarily to protect citizens, to protect lives and property, but also to advance their nations. Secondly, we must genuinely invest in preventing and tackling insecurity and terrorism on the continent, and politically address conflict injustice, which can be one of the main, foundations for violence and people trying to solve their problems themselves. We must holistically address conflict, injustices, discriminatory practices, human rights abuses, and development setbacks that spur terrorism. Number three, there must be cooperation between African nations and leaders to ensure that we're sharing information. We must ensure that we are talking to each other. What does Ghana know? How can it share that information with Nigeria? What does Uganda know? How can they share that information with Kenya? What does Rwanda know? How can it share it with its neighbors? We must, of a necessity, start to discuss insecurity. We must start to look at these technologies in a way that kind of reduce the divisions between us. We must be using technologies to come together, to converge rather than diverge, our knowledge, our challenges, but also our solutions. Now, the African Union has a very strong role to play. And I think sometimes it's unfortunate that the African Union is not, is not really playing its big brother / big sister role as powerfully as it should. So the African Union must monitor the interface between the positive and negative effects of these emerging technologies. It must lead the way for research. It must be able to say, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Somalia, Morocco, let's have a conversation. What are some of the applications in your area? How can we share this knowledge? How can we keep each other accountable? The African Union needs to step up. The African Union needs to, I don't know how many other ways to say, but the African Union needs to step up. They need to monitor the prevalence and the deployment of these technologies on the continent. They must also, be open to conversations from civil society, from digital rights advocates, from human rights defenders. And finally, which is a point I've made a couple times before, governments must redefine security. They must redefine security from the lens of their people, from the lens of the people that make up the country, from the lens of the people that make up the continent, and less about geographical locations, and less especially about political expediency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, my sister. Point well made, and you round up with 5 recommendations which are very clear. First, that African countries and governments, including citizens, must learn and adapt technologies for the advancement of people's lives and livelihoods, rather than undermining people's lives and livelihoods. 2, governments and states must focus on combating terrorism and violent extremism and the technologies that these forces use, rather than putting surveillance technologies against their own citizens. 3, there's need for cooperation between and among nations and leaders across borders to share information, share lessons, share, exchange ideas on how best to manage these emerging technologies for the sake of peace and peace building on the continent. 4, the AU, and you're very strong on this one, the AU must play its rightful big brother, big sister role as a continental body to monitor these technologies and ensure that they are used for the benefit of our countries, for the benefit of Africans in terms of peace, stability, and development. And finally, you make another strong point of revisiting the concept of peace and security in Africa. What is exactly meant by peace and security? You critique the current situation where this is taken merely to mean state security. And you argue that that should be revisited to ensure that it also means human security. So it shouldn't just be a security of states, but it should be security of people. So I think that's a very, very important contribution you've made. We'd like to thank you for that. Let me call on our last speaker on this panel before we open up for discussion. Our discussant, Joseph Amoah. Joseph Amangwa Amoah. Joseph? Is Joseph around? I'll need to be guided because I'm not able to see who is around here. Is Joseph around on this platform?
Let us give him 1 more minute. If not, we'll have his points delivered later on when we can proceed to the question and answers.
Okay, that's fine.
Oh, I'm on mute.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've just opened, I don't see him here.
Let's give him 1 more minute, and if he's not there, we can proceed to the question and answer, and later on he can deliver on his point. Dr. Matlosa, let's proceed to the question and answer session, and he can join us later on.
Thank you. Can we get into a general discussion? I think we have, how much time do we have, Ruby? We should be having like 30 minutes or so. Correct me? We have to go up to 12 o'clock, right? Yes, so can we have any questions, please? You can also feel free to post questions in the chat room. Feel free to post questions in the chat room, but you can also raise your hand. I'll be able to see. I'm just checking in the chat room now if we have any questions. Yes, I think we do have. We do have. Ruby, will you be able to? Are you able to get into the chat room and distill some of the questions, or should I do it?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I see a question. I see a question from Alexander.
Yes.
Yes, I think there's a question from Alexander. We're just focusing on questions only. The comments, I think they're okay. The authors can read through the comments. There's a question that goes, my question is, I quote, my question is, there are over 15 top new emerging technologies. Example, artificial intelligence, 5G and Internet of Things, serverless computing, cloud computing, biometrics, augmented and virtual realities, robotics, natural language processing, blockchains, quantum computing, data analytics, cybersecurity, etc., etc. Which of these are we targeting for peace and security operations, and where do we start from? That's the first question. That's the first question. Who would like to? Can I suggest that my sister Fumi take us this one?
Well, I would start out by saying that we tend to what we've tended to see, certainly in Nigeria, is I think my fellow panelists, Chioma, Aguegbo mentioned, we've tended to see a lot of reactive regulation in countries like Nigeria. And what I'd like to focus on in my research, chiming in with her, is that we need to focus on having what kind of strategies are we really, what are our strategic goals and what are our underlying strategies prior to regulation? So in a sense, I don't think it matters what the technology is. It does matter on some level, but even prior to engaging with technology, I think we need to think about what our strategic goals and objectives are. And I entirely agree with her that there needs to be a focus on security is not just meaning a government or territory, but also security of people. With that strategic focus, that should be the start of engagement, because I think there's a tendency to regulate by blocking. If the most prominent digital economy strategy throughout Africa today is the internet shutdown or blocking companies and or services. And I see that in many respects as being in part a colonial hangover that's been reinforced by post-colonial authoritarian tendencies. That's not a digital economy strategy. So I think even prior to regulation, it's important to step back and say, what are our strategic goals internally and externally? Because I think regardless of what you do within Africa, there are a lot of external parties that are part of the equation, and I think they need to be thought about and managed. And many of those are non-governmental players when we think about technology. So I was on a panel where one of the things we were discussing, it's likely that, going back to my point about measurement, it's likely that Facebook and Google know more about citizens in Africa than most African governments. So that, and they're not part of any sort of, they're an external private sector player. So I think there needs to be a step back into thinking about what are our strategic goals and what are the internal and external constraints and limitations of achieving those goals.
Okay, thank you very much, my sister. Prof. Adarau, can you take this one? What plans and strategies do we have in place to integrate or infuse these high-tech digital solutions into peace and security operations, especially during deployment, combat, gathering, or intelligence, and making peacekeeping efficient? Is Professor Katauka around?
Yeah.
Professor Haru?
Yeah. I'm here.
Yes. Can you tackle that one?
Which question?
Did you get it?
15 technology.
No. The next one, the one that starts with 7. What plans and strategies do we have in place to integrate or infuse these high-tech digital solutions into peace and security operations, especially during deployment, combat, gathering of intelligence, and making peacekeeping efficient? Are you able to tackle that one?
Yeah, very difficult question. But I mean that maybe many technologies are very important. AI and IoT, and I'd like to say that is the Internet of everything. IoE, that should be much more efficient than the specific limited technology. For the peace and security, I think that as a tool earlier, the combination and the amalgam of the new technologies and classical technology. That's my answer.
Thank you, Prof.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. My sister Choma, I think there's a comment that I don't think you need to somebody's agreeing with you, so there's no need for you to tackle that one. I think it's Alexander Lapte again from Upstar Africa. There's a comment on your paper. It's fine, but you can tackle the other question. Where is it now? Yes. You made reference to the AU in your recommendations. So the question is, how best is the AU suited to regulate the emerging technologies and their utilizations for good intentions and development of the continent? Now, that's from Brihanu Figade. And there's another related question from Miratab. I would like to know if the AU has any monitoring tasks to some African country leaders who limit technologies and communication to their office, not encourage people in such technologies to secure their power safely. So I think this refers to power to internet shutdowns. So you can tackle this too, Shoma.
Thank you very much. And these are two very interesting questions. So thank
Shoma?
you. And thank you to the people who asked them. I think the first question that we need
Is
to
Shoma?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Oh, I think she has a problem with the line. We can't hear you. Yes, we can see you now. Can you try to speak again?
All right. Can you hear me now?
And it looks like you're muted. Why can't we hear you? We can see you, but we can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm not muted.
Or is it my problem only? Is everybody hearing Shoma, please?
Can you hear me now? Or can anyone else hear me? Oh, my voice is very low.
No.
Is it better now? Can you hear me better?
No, my sister. On my side, it's not coming through. I don't know. Ruby, are you able to hear her? No, we can't hear you. We can see you, but we can't hear you.
Yes, your voice is very low.
Yes. You may have to try sign language. Eh?
Is it better now?
No, we can't hear you. It's faint, very faint.
Okay, I'm not sure what else to do. Yeah, maybe I'll just log out and log back in. I'll be back in a minute.
We can't hear. Are there any questions in the meantime?
Is it better now?
Yes, better now. Yes.
Fantastic. Okay,
yes.
Great. So I was responding to the questions on the AU and what the African Union can do. And I guess the first question we need to ask ourselves is, where is the AU at the moment? Right? Where is the African Union at the moment? What is their role on the continent? Where is the oversight function? Where is the regulatory function? Where is the monitoring? Where is the supervisory function that they're supposed to have over nations on the continent? Where are they when countries shut down their internet? Where are they when there's conflict? Where are they when there's coups? Right? And so to think about, you must first have there's a thing about credibility, which then dictates or kind of tells people whether a person or a body or an institution is to be trusted or not. Where was the African Union when EndSARS in Nigeria happened? Where was the African Union when Fees Must Fall happened in South Africa? Where were they when Zambian women marched calling for an end to sexual and gender-based violence? When we talk about security, and this was the thrust of my presentation, we must think about security as not only geographical locations, as not just continent-wide squabbles. We must also look at this security as the advancement of people within that location. And so we have to think about, and this is why I came down very heavy on the EU, on the African Union, because it is not fulfilling that role. And this is the same conversation I had, when I was invited to, when I was invited to have the conversation around the Commonwealth. Where are these bodies that typically, when a member state is expelled, it sends a note of warning to other states? Where are these bodies that when a nation state or when a member state is cautioned, that caution is not taken with levity? And so to come more directly to the question around what can the African Union do, it must first start to invest in knowledge, but not knowledge that it cannot defend. Recently, there was a couple of years ago, there was a scandal about, surveillance of the African Union building because that outsourced that to an Asian country. So again, we need to ask ourselves if there's a popular saying about he who pays the piper dictates the tune. If the African Union doesn't see these times as an opportunity to reorganize, right? To redefine itself. Like I said in my presentation, nations are now renegotiating their utility of digital technologies. In the same way, the African Union must start to look at itself and renegotiate its community, or renegotiate the members of its community. And this will then have an effect on how it plays with emerging technologies or how it plays with digital technologies. The final thing I'm going to say is that it must invest in research. And not just research that is for the sake of research, but it must invest in research from people who are actually doing stuff on the continent. So bring in the zip lines, bring in the M-Pesas, bring in the piggy vests, bring in the life banks, bring in people, the flutter waves, the Andelas, people who are doing this work, right? And then have conversations with them, bring in fringe communities. Let your research be as inclusive as the work that you are trying to do. But that knowledge that then determines where we go and where we take our technologies, that's absolutely important. And that's a place that the African Union must focus its energies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Choma. I think the only footnote I'll add to your question, which I agree with 100%, is that the same message that we have, articulated so eloquently should also apply to the regional economic communities across the five regions of our continent. We have in Central Africa, ECAS. We have in East Africa, EAC, COMESA, IGAD, a number of them. We have in North Africa, SENSAD. We have AMU. You have in Southern Africa, SADC. You have in West Africa, ECOWAS. So I think the same message should also trickle down to this regional institutions. I think that is clear, loud and clear in your response. Can we have more? I'm trying to check if we have in the chat room anything new in the chat room. Yes, there's a question from Wanjiru. Let me see before Wanjiru. There's another question from Lionel Hugo. No, even before that, sorry. I need assistance here. There's one from Irene before those two. Irene says, technology seems to have contributed much better in citizen engagement, governance, and much less in security and peacekeeping in Africa. It would be very helpful to learn from Japan on the experiences with peace, security, and governance, and what lessons, recommendations they can make for leapfrogging the use of technology in the broader theme of peace and security in Africa. That is a question from Irene. I think is directed to Professor Kataoka Sadaru. Prof, there's a question there for you.
Yes,
let me repeat it. Did you get it? Did you see it? Yeah, please go ahead.
Question Irene. Yes, that's true. She has a completely right. You know very well that Japan is a very small actor for military issues in Africa, but diplomatic issues in Africa is one of the main principal actor. Japan is I think especially Japan, as I told you earlier, like to promote a hybrid method, combination of classical method and high technology, but specifically a dialogue and transparency, negotiation, and cooperation should be a useful and efficient way, and support for regional and local actors. And also, we have to promote the stronger cooperation among, as you mentioned, Dr. Kabere, the LEX, SADC, ECOWAS, IGAD, the case of Sahel and Cabo Delgado. The result is very obvious. With that, the strong cooperation of LEX, it's difficult to resolve the conflict. But as I told you, the promotion of dialogue, transparency, negotiation, and cooperation. I think that's the spirit of our NAPSA. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Let's get to another one. There's a question from Lionel Hugo. What is your comment on the Pegasus scandal related to security risk in Africa? Is that question clear? And I'm not quite sure even. Fumi, do you get the question?
No, I don't. I don't
sure
see it. And I don't think I understand it.
Can the person responsible for this please make it clearer? It reads, what is your comment on the Pegasus scandal related to the security risk in Africa? It's not clear. Can you please recast it and make it clearer? Let's get to the next question by Wanjiru Kichoi. Question, I'm interested in finding out how these emerging technologies can facilitate grassroots communities in peace-building processes and interventions. What strategies do we have to make these technologies accessible and usable at the local level? I think this belongs to Shoma, since you linked these technologies to people and social mobilization of citizens. Shoma? Is Shoma still with us?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Can you get the question? Yes.
Please, can you take the question again?
Yes. The question is related to grassroots mobilization through technology. It reads, I'm interested in finding out how these emerging technologies can facilitate grassroots communities in peace-building processes and interventions. What strategies do we have to make these technologies accessible and usable at the local level? There you go.
That's a fantastic question. And I think I'll respond to it by saying that my organization, TechHer, last year after the NSARS movement, produced a report called People Movements, focusing on the evolution of technology, but also the leadership of women as it concerns, movements and protests, etc. We went back 10 years, just talking about things like, for instance, in 2009, a friend of mine, Chude Jidongo, wrote a bunch of us an email, and the title of that email was, "Where is the outrage?" That singular email led to what became known as Enough is Enough, the Enough is Enough protests of 2009, and then of course led on to Enough is Enough Nigeria, which is an organization. Now the interesting thing that I'm trying to pull out is that when we were planning those protests in 2009, we only had Blackberries, and I'm sure that a good number of us on this call will remember what Blackberries are. And so we were using Blackberries to plan, and we're making phone calls and text messages, etc. Fast forward to 2020, when the NSARS protests happened, also in Nigeria, we had people live streaming, right? Live streaming via their phones. This was a protest that was coordinated, completely online. As a matter of fact, it became known as the leaderless protest because there wasn't any leader. People took ownership of the protest in their various localities. And I guess that's my answer to the question on how technologies can be used to mobilize. The first thing is the idea, because whether we like it or not, technology is the pipeline for whatever you're passing through it. It is not the product. It is the means to that product. So what is the thing that you're passionate about? And interestingly, on Thursday, I'm going to be speaking about the power of your voice with one of the leading ministers in Nigeria today. And one of the things I'm going to talk to people about is, what is the thing that you are passionate about? In the same way that you talk to your friend in the market and say, I want to do this and I want to do that. That's the same way you talk to them about an idea that you want them to advocate about with you. In the same way that you complain to your friend about a problem, it's the same way you should be able to mobilize them. The truth is, there is not one movement that was dropped into anybody's laps. If you go back to the Arab Spring and Tunisia, it was one person saying, I can't take this anymore. So what is that thing that you can't take anymore? Have a conversation with people. You need to build the conviction in them that, for instance, brings them out every day on the street. You need to build the conviction in them that makes them take to their social media to talk about the things you're interested in. You need to build the conviction in them that makes them spend their money. Last year in June, I convened a movement called State of Emergency because we needed to push for urgent holistic action by the government against sexual and gender-based violence. It has cost us money, it has cost us time, it has cost us relationships, but it's something that we're fully convinced about. So my question to the person who asked this question is, what are you absolutely convinced about that needs to change in your locality, in your community, in your city, in your country? Find 10 people that you can talk to about that, and then let technology be the tool that helps you broadcast that message, that helps you amplify your message. It's not the beginning, it is the platform, or it's the conveyor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Any more questions? I see another one. Will African security hubs, from Alexander Lamti, will African security hubs be willing to share intelligence through technological and digital advancement to prevent future occurrences in coups and instability, etc., etc.? Example, if there's a hacking attack in Nigeria or Ghana, will Togo be willing to help de-hack? Any taker of that one? For me, is that clear to you?
Well, I'd like to perhaps try to address that question, but also go back to the Pegasus question. Yeah. And hold on one second. I need to fix my video.
No problem.
And go back to, I think one thing that we need to think about and confront is the reality that technologies today, that we have companies that I refer to as digital economy powers, and these companies have a lot of power. The Pegasus scandal refers to spyware that was distributed using Apple iPhones that enabled surveillance. People think of journalists and others. And the question was, are we all becoming spies? And we could also talk about that in relation to NSARS, because one reason Nigeria blocked Twitter was really used as a mechanism for that leaderless protest to coalesce and take shape. If we contrast that with Facebook and Instagram's owned by Facebook, but a separate service. Facebook and Instagram had marked, their AI bots had marked the posts, all of that content that was being live streamed, Facebook and Instagram marked it as fake news. So our technology universe is mediated by, to a significant degree, by companies, often American companies based in Silicon Valley, that have particular issues and concerns of their own, which I don't have time to go into, that have decision-making power over a significant number of people in the world. And that's the other side of technology that needs to be thought about strategically. How do you deal with the strategic reality of a very narrow range of decision makers who are making decisions that impact millions, if not billions of people all over the world? So when we think about harnessing the power of this technology for grassroots movements, for peace and security, to the extent we're using the technology that's developed by that narrow range of companies, which is likely to be the case, we have to really be attentive to the implications of that kind of external power and what that means, and the ability of those companies to potentially shut down dialogue or enhance certain things. Because if you look at the role of Facebook in Myanmar, for instance, in the Myanmar genocide, so these companies can facilitate grassroots movements, but they can also block things in the same way that Nigeria blocked Twitter and blocked cryptocurrency, essentially, largely in response to the NSAR's protests. I mean, the government was pretty clear that that was part of the reason why Twitter was being blocked and why cryptocurrency was effectively being blocked, shutting down abruptly a regulatory process that had been going on in relation to cryptocurrency.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Loud and clear, loud and clear. The next one from Tevere. Tevere Ugo. Tevere Wogu. Rather than the technology or along with the technology, how could we link the African traditional knowledge with the technology for the sustainable peace and security in Africa? Let me repeat, rather than the technology or along with the technology, how could we link the African traditional knowledge with the technology for the sustainable peace and security in Africa? Any strategy for the AU, any strategy from AU or from the presenters? Any taker, Shoma? Any idea? Shoma? Is Shoma online? No? Let's move to the next one. Let's move to the next one. How is the leader's role, this is from Dawit, how is the leader's role in support of technology to enhance the livelihood of our society and digital literacy rate? Especially mobile phone has, maybe I think if I get Dawit is trying to say, what is the role of leaders? What is the role of leaders in support of technology for the enhancement of livelihood of citizens and digital literacy, especially mobile phones? What is the role of leaders in support of technology in the enhancement of citizens' livelihoods and digital literacy? What is the role of leaders? For me?
I'll briefly address this. I think this question touches on issues of really critical issues related to capacity. And this is a global issue. The leaders all over the world, how do they develop the capacity to both understand and make policy about technologies? And I'm not sure if when I listen to the US Congress and some of their Facebook hearings, there are clearly questions of capacity globally about who's making the decisions and the rules and what kind of engagement do they have with technology. I would underscore that the intergenerational demographics in many African countries highlight the real need for attention to issues of capacity, because African countries today have the youngest populations in the world with the oldest rulers in the world. And we know technology is not that only young people use technology, but young people across the continent are deeply engaged with all kinds of technologies. So I think we need to really think about how do we think about capacity building from the perspective of policymakers, because I think the technology universe is constantly shifting. And for those of us that weren't sort of digital natives, I think it's a continuing challenge to keep ahead of and really understand the technology universe. And I would also add the kind of authoritarian tendencies that Chioma, my fellow panelist Chioma, noted, means that we may see people harnessing technology more for the continuation of government power, for government security, rather than for security of citizens. So capacity building should be thought about broadly in terms of building capacity for people. And I think this is one way that we can combat some of the tendencies where, in my book, I talk about something called scarcity of opportunity, where many young people may not have many opportunities. And this may explain the appeal of insurgency and the radicalization of some groups of young people. And I think there are ways to combat that from a policy perspective, but I think we have to have proactive policies that recognize fundamental sources of insecurity for human beings.
For me, loud and clear. Since Shoma is not, is Shoma back? But maybe then, since we're drawing to a close, can we ask our panelists now to make their parting shots? Your last, your takeaway, basically, and what key message you want to leave with us? 2 minutes. Prof. Sadaru?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. 2 minutes, just a parting shot, the key message, please.
Yeah, key message. Just some answer from the last question. Include use of emerging technology has also included radicalization and recruitment and mobilization of violent extremists and so forth. Maybe that is a rule of responsibility of the government, state behavior, but for the government should control and make a good governance of the internet basis on democratic principles to make a distinction between terrorist propaganda and expression of freedom. That is the government responsibility. That's my answer, and that I pointed that in my presentation. As my last message for the Japan NAFTA and the peace building, and but of course to build the peace, to have to build the strong institution. Obama, when Obama visited Ghana, he said Africa is not needing strong man, needing strong institution. That's a very good strategy. Japan also trying to build this strong institution for Africa to resolve the eventual conflict. That's my message.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you. Loud and clear, loud and clear. For me, your parting shot, key message you want to leave with us?
So I want to start by just briefly citing Lamido Sanusi, who's the former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria and the former Emir of Kano. He, in an interview just a few years ago, he basically said it's difficult to turn a large number of people into radical Islamists or drug gangs if they have jobs in security. So I just want to highlight again, this broader meaning of security that's been discussed here is really important. In the digital era, many African countries sit at the crossroads of past paths that have been to too large a degree authoritarian, coming out of colonialism, with future digital economy possibilities. Now, I think that the challenge is to harness those future digital economy possibilities in ways that will promote not only economic growth, but also decreased marginalization of African countries globally, as well as marginalization of people within African countries. This requires, I think, careful strategic management of internal and external circumstances, capacity building to really truly embrace the digital era. And that capacity building involves knowledge, but it also involves sort of building out technology infrastructure, things like broadband within countries. And it also means the disruption, the conscious disruption of these past authoritarian tendencies that have been discussed, and to really embrace the future of harnessing digital technology for peace and security within African countries, and also for greater inclusion of African countries within the global economy, and also greater inclusion within countries and reduction of poverty. I think it's really critical that the human security aspects be taken into account as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for me for those last remarks. Can we try Shoma, the last remarks, final remarks, if she's back online? Otherwise, I will hand over to the organizers and really thank you for Shoma. Is she back online? No. No, since we have a minute to go, I think it's just for me to thank the organizers of this meeting for putting together this panel. A very important subject we are tackling of new technologies and the implications for peace and security in Africa. And I think it's clear from the discussions that we have to handle this subject with the seriousness it deserves, because these technologies are good if they're in the right hands and under favorable condition, but they can also be bad if they're in wrong hands under unfavorable conditions. So it's a double-edged sword. So I think for peace and security of the continent, we need to bear that in mind. And second, that when we talk peace and security, I think the panelists have been very clear that when we talk peace and security, we also need to be mindful that people should be at the center of the clamor for peace, not just states. So we're talking more of human security, even more than state security. And finally, that states and leaders, whether it's member states of the African Union, individual member states of regional economic communities, or we talk of these regional economic communities and the AU itself, they need to ensure that they put people at the center of their response in regulating these technologies. People should not be penalized for these technologies through surveillance, and while at the same time the fight against terrorism it's ongoing, and there's not much progress being seen. I think the panelists were very clear on this. So I think those are the few things I wanted to close with, and once again to thank IPSS, thank Atoyonas, Madam Letty, and Ruby for this opportunity, and I hand over to them now. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ruby.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matlasa. It was an honor to have you here with us. Thank you for accepting our invitation, for sparing your time, and for your excellent moderation as usual. I would also like to thank all the speakers for your invaluable inputs and for accepting our invitation. We have now come to the end of the first session, and we'll break for 1 hour. We will meet once again at 1 to moving on to the second session of the forum. So I would like to invite all of you to stay with us and join us again at 1. See you in an hour. Thank you.